you explain why you think Césaire isn't given his due, especially here in this country?
Yes, I don't know. It seems a lot of Anglophone intellectuals have taken issue with the philosophical movement and political movement he founded along with Léopold Senghor and Léon Damas called Négritude.
Yes.
And I think the accusation is that it's too overarching, somehow too abstract, because what he was doing with Négritude, Césaire, and he founded this movement in the 30s,
yes,
was he wanted to reappropriate that word nègre with its insulting connotations, like
yes,
the N-word.
The N-word, yes.
And he's saying, OK, we're going to be out, we're going to be loud and we're proud with this word, and we're going to proclaim our black culture. It was like black consciousness avant la lettre.
Yes.
And it was necessarily quite a violent rhetorical tool. But my goodness, Césaire's poetry is incredibly eloquent and beautiful, and he inspired so many people with the Négritude movement.
But in what way did he inspire them exactly? How did he want people to feel elevated by their blackness? We know what Steve Biko was doing in South Africa in the 70s, but what about Césaire in the 30s and beyond?
Well, Césaire was the product of a colonial education. And when he was at school in Martinique, he was taught French history, French culture, and then he went to the École Normale Supérieure in Paris as a great scholarship boy. He was abused in the street as a sale nègre, dirty Negro.
Yes.
But he discovered African culture, and he said, this isn't good enough. We are made mute. We are not given a voice. So we're going to rediscover our African roots. He was talking about the black diaspora, the products of slavery, and he put that right in the centre of his poetry and his plays.
What about some of those plays, and why is it, do you think, that they're not as well known here? It can't just be because they were written in French.
That's a very interesting question. Well, maybe it is, because I think the Anglophone world, particularly the British world, is pretty lazy about translating plays.
Yes.
I translated Une Tempête, A Tempest, which is Césaire's anti-colonial refashioning of Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Yes.
And that went on in the Gate Theatre in 1998 to a great critical success. His play A Season in the Congo about Patrice Lumumba and the creation of an independent Congo, which then became Zaire.
Yes, indeed.
Is just about to be staged by the Young Vic, I believe a British premiere.
Starring the great Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Exactly.
We're going to have to try and get him on this programme. Yes, Chiwetel, you're going to be on Shoot the Messenger. Carry on.
Fantastic. My actual favourite is the first, La Tragédie du Roi Christophe, the tragedy of King Christophe. Christophe was one of Toussaint Louverture's generals when there was this incredible slave uprising in Saint-Domingue, St. Dominic's, which then became Haiti.
Yes, indeed.
And Césaire said it was in Haiti that for the first time Négritude stood up and proclaimed its humanity. And I think this is an incredible play which we in Britain have yet really to discover.
OK, well, let's talk about A Tempest, Une Tempête.
Yep.
And Isabelle has, I think, a copy of the play in front of her, which she's going to perform at the Institut Français tomorrow.
Absolutely.
But by the way, how ironic is that the French Institute and the French establishment lionizes him today? It can't have always done so.
That's a very good question. Absolutely right. Césaire was, for a very long time, I think about 50 years, he was the mayor of Fort-de-France in Martinique. And exactly, he suffered a lot of neglect and colonial arrogance from the French, really. And it was only with the arrival of Mitterrand that things got a little bit better. There was an independentist movement in Martinique, but Césaire, having seen what had happened in Africa, sort of took a political decision to keep Martinique. Martinique is still part of France.
Yes,
the
I mean,
Dom-Tom.
This is the thing,
the
the
territoire, the dominion, département outre-mer.
So kind of like, you know, colonial, well, here in this country we call it crown dependencies.
Exactly,
you know, like Montserrat.
Yes, that's
example.
right.
And is that one of the reasons, do you think, why some of the radical intellectuals of the mid to late 20th century, the Pan-Africanists thought, well, he's more in the house than in the field, he doesn't want full independence?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because certainly it seems also to run counter to his own rhetoric in his plays and his poems. But I think that Césaire looked around, saw lots of chaotic situations in newly independent countries, and took a pragmatic decision that he thought that Martinique might be better off. But who knows, maybe spiritually it was a mistake.
It's going to be
I wouldn't dare to comment, really.
It's going to be the stuff of very serious debate at the Institut Français tomorrow.
It will be, yes.
So, OK, Une Tempête, A Tempest, Isabelle, what are you going to read to us?
If you're going to read Ariel? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she's going to read When Ariel is Given His Freedom by Prospero to begin with.
All right, yes.
M'ennuyer Je crains que les journées ne me paraissent courtes. Là où les cécropies gantent d'argent l'impatience de leurs mains, là où les fougères délivrent d'un cri vert le noir tronçon têtu de leur corps sacrifié, là où la baie enivrante mûrit l'escale pour le ramier sauvage, par la gorge de l'oiseau musicien, je laisserai tomber une à une, chacune plus délectable, 4 notes si douces que la dernière fera lever une brûlure dans le cœur des esclaves les plus oublieux.
Bravo, merveilleux, formidable, formidable. You get all that? Did you get all that? Oh, wow, okay. Now, the gist of that, for those who don't speak French.
Bored, I fear that the days will seem too short. There, where the cecropia glove their impatient hands with silver, there, where the ferns free with a green cry the stubborn black stems from their etched bodies, there, where the intoxicating berry ripens the shy wood pigeon's port of call, into the throat of that musical bird I shall drop one by one, and each one more ravishing, 4 notes so sweet that the last will kindle an ardour in the hearts of the most forgetful slaves, yearning for freedom.
You know what? This is good. I wish I could be there tomorrow. Alas, I can't. So, and for those people who won't be able to, can you explain in a bit more, I suppose, a bit more detail, how the French see him now? Because, of course, you say it, and I think I agree with you, the British don't really know him. Aimé Césaire.
Well, it's very interesting. A couple of years ago, 2011, I happened to be in Paris around about April, and I just suddenly was by the Pantheon, the Panthéon, and I looked up, and there was a big banner, a big poster, and it said, La France honore Aimé Césaire. The France honours Aimé Césaire. Yeah. And I don't know if you know about the Pantheon, but there's a legend about it.
Voltaire, Rousseau there.
Exactly, they're all buried in there, and it says, Aux grands hommes, la patrie reconnaissance. To the great people, the fatherland is grateful. Now, I think Césaire would not like this idea of the fatherland.
No,
I don't think he'd accept that. And he wouldn't allow himself to be translated there. He's not buried there. But there was a formal ceremony where they honoured the memory of Césaire and all he'd achieved, and there's a plaque inside, and this was when Sarkozy was still president, and it was a huge state affair. There was pretty much a state burial in Martinique.
I mean, he lived very long. I mean, he died in 2008.
He did. He was 95. Yes. Absolutely. No, he's hugely important in France. His works, they're in the French have what they call a repertory, a sort of official canonized list of plays, and all his plays are in the repertory. His poetry is taught for the baccalaureate. You know, it's like doing Shakespeare for A-level.
Yes.
You know, he is very, very important, and he inspired post-colonial Africa and pre-colonial Africa, very importantly.
Dele, as somebody who is helping to curate a season of African writing called Africa Writes for the Royal African Society, sounds like the kind of person who should be bigged up by your organisation too.
Very much so. I think the thing with French, and I mean, for example, we're doing this literature festival, shameless plug, 5th to the 7th of July at the British Library. But essentially, most of the writers are Anglophone.
Yes. And
Aimé Césaire obviously would fit into the sort of, for example, we're having a tribute to Chinua Achebe, and he would fit into that kind of grand culture. But I think there's a big divide between African literature in English and African literature in French, and we haven't really yet found a way to bridge that gap. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm more than happy to do translations to provide them for the occasion. Use my script of a Tempest.
Yes.
No, but yes, that's a very interesting point. Who was it? It was Wole Soyinka,
yes,
who criticised negritude and says, does a tiger proclaim its tigritude? And I think that there has been in the Anglophone world this criticism of negritude as somehow being a bit too French in its abstract, overarching quality.
And there's a sort of certain obsession with blackness as well.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, for me, I think the real difference is that, you know, in France as a colonial power had this big idea of the évolue, you become civilized by becoming French. Whereas the English generally sort of said, you know, you're run by England, but you don't actually have to become Englishmen.
Yeah.
You know,
You
So
become
this-
English if you queue or something like
Yeah.
that. Or in a corner shop.
But, you know, Césaire had a great dig at what the French call la mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission. He attacks that, actually in A Tempest, and in all of his plays, and that's why he's proclaiming an alternative black culture which is proud of its African origins. He said, I am on the side of those who are oppressed.
Yes,
and
he
he
did.
was an incredibly eloquent champion of the oppressed and the marginalised, and I think we should not underestimate that.
I want to know from Isabel how Césaire is seen, how he's recognized in his own country, in Martinique.
Mais Césaire est profondément aimé et honoré en Martinique.
Profoundly loved and honoured in Martinique.
Yeah.
Il est celui qui a permis de vivre pleinement l'antillanité.
He allowed the people of the French Caribbean to live fully their Antilles identity.
Yeah. But do people in Martinique, Guadeloupe, see themselves as Africans the way people in the English-speaking Caribbean increasingly are doing so now?
Est-ce que les Antillais se regardent en tant qu'Africains comme les gens qui viennent des Antilles britanniques?
Non.
No.
Non,
Right.
du tout. C'est-à-dire que les Antillais se ressentent, se vivent comme étant descendants d'Africains et prenant part à l'histoire de l'Afrique, mais en ayant une culture qui leur est propre.
Right, so they feel that they are descended from Africa and they've taken their part in history, but they now have their own culture which is proper to them. And I think Isabel would agree with me, though, that the subsequent créolité movement, which criticised Césaire, actually in Martinique, criticised him for something which is a bit too abstract. And they're proclaiming a more nuanced, localised identity now. I think that's what they're doing with créolité.
And Kalina, as somebody from the British part of Guyana, I mean, how do you see the French part and the wider French Caribbean?
Well, I think this is all really interesting. And actually, what I would like to say is that I wonder whether there's a role for this sort of thinking here in the UK for some of the black children now in our schools. I mean, only the other day, Gove said something like he wants history to be taught and it must be about the wonderful, superior nature
of the Education Secretary's attempt to return us to a more traditional type of history
and I
teaching.
wonder how that will play with a lot of black British children here. And isn't Césaire sort of saying something about being judged, not being judged by white assessments, but creating our own kind of assessments of what good and bad is. And I think that, you know, it could be quite important here.
So this centenary could be a springboard, even if it is by a French African Caribbean writer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, Césaire said that he felt both Martinique, but he did feel that he was African in his heart and soul as well.
Did he travel widely around Africa at all, Césaire? Or is he like Marcus Garvey, who never actually did set foot on African soil?
I believe, no, he did travel quite widely, and of course he was also a French senator.
Yes.
And I know he was invited to Moscow and all sorts of places. Did he travel to Africa, Césaire? Il a voyagé en Afrique?
Oui.
Yeah, he did. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, so your event at the French Institute is tomorrow?
Tomorrow it's Aimé Césaire, a centenary celebration. It starts 10 o'clock tomorrow. Registration is from 9:30. The more the merrier. Come and honour and learn about Césaire. Tomorrow, French Institute, South Kensington Tube.
And Isabel, you're going to be there on plein form, yes? We expect so. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for Shoot the Messenger this week. Remember, you can always catch up on this or previous editions of the show by visiting our website, voxafrica.co.uk/STM. You can also follow moi on Twitter. I'm at Bonsuman. Many thanks to my guests, Isabel Fruleux, Dr. Philip Crispen, Dr. Amadou Janet, Colleen Harris, and Dele Fatonle. And you for watching. Till the same time next week. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.